Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is Connecticut's new energy storage program, Energy Storage Solutions Program, how it provides benefits to ratepayers, participants, and the grid. This webinar is being presented in collaboration by Clean Energy Group's Resilient Power Project and the Connecticut Green Bank. And we have a really exciting lineup of panelists with us on the line today. Before I pass it over to our moderators, I'm going to go over a few quick webinar logistics. All of our participants today are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of the webinar. You can call in via telephone, or you can use your computer's mic and speakers. If you'd like to minimize your webinar console so that you can view the presentation full screen, you can click on the orange arrow that you see circled on your screen there. And you can also use that orange arrow to expand your webinar console. One thing that you might like to do with your webinar console is to submit your questions and your comments. We are excited to hear from you. We have a lot of people registered, so please do submit your questions when you think of them. Don't necessarily wait until the very end. We have a ton of people registered, so we do expect to get a lot of questions. We're going to be saving about 15 minutes following our presentations for a Q&A with the audience. We'll get as many questions as we can. A final note, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send you a copy of the webinar recording and also a PDF of the webinar slides within about 48 hours. And we'll also be posting all of those webinar materials on our website. With that, I'd like to now pass it over to my colleague, Todd Olinsky-Paul. Todd is a Senior Project Director at Clean Energy Group, and he will be getting started today. Over to you, Todd.
Well, great. Thanks, Samantha. Welcome everybody to the webinar. We have a lot of really excellent speakers and a lot of people signed up. And as Samantha said, we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. I'm going to begin by doing a brief introduction of Clean Energy Group and some of our programs, and then we will get started with the focus of the presentation. So for those of you who don't know, Clean Energy Group, or CEG, works at the forefront of clean energy innovation. We are committed to an equitable and inclusive transition to a resilient, sustainable, clean energy future. We are located both physically here in Vermont and also virtually on the web at cleanegroup.org, so you can always go to our website for more information. And also, I should note that this webinar, as all of our webinars, is being recorded. It will be posted on our website as well as the slides will be posted on our website. So I am not able to advance this, Samantha, for whatever reason. There we go. So I just wanted to mention that with regard to this particular webinar, we have a lot of materials that we've developed over the past few years. CEG has something called the Resilient Power Project, which is focusing on increasing public and private investment in clean, resilient power systems, which we typically, to us, means solar and storage behind the meter. And these technologies can be configured to provide both resilience and cost savings, protecting low-income and vulnerable communities. And we focus on affordable housing and critical public facilities in order to maximize the impacts of this resilient power. We work with city, state, and federal policymakers. We help the partners we work with to develop policies and programs. And as an example, we've worked quite closely with a number of state clean energy agencies in New England, including in almost every state, I think, including Connecticut. And so we're very happy to be able to join with Connecticut Green Bank and Ryor and others on this webinar. Again, we have lots of reports, as you could probably see from that slide. You might hear mention of a program called Connected Solutions, which we supported development of in Massachusetts. It's spread throughout New England, and a variety of, sort of adaptation of that program model is now being used in Connecticut, and it's known as storage solutions, and that's going to be part of the focus of this webinar. Next slide, please. So in addition to all the program and policy support I've been talking about, CEG also provides technical assistance for distributed solar and storage projects across the country. These are behind-the-meter projects supporting critical infrastructure. We've done more than 250 of these projects. We have a technical assistance fund that has provided more than $1 million in technical assistance grants for these kinds of projects. And this is just a representative example of a few of these. We've done many affordable, multifamily affordable housing properties. We've done community buildings, health clinics, and so forth. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, we have some really good speakers today. We are joined by Bryan Garcia, the President and CEO of Connecticut Green Bank, who's going to be speaking next. We also have Josh Ryor, the Director of Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, or PURA. So if you hear us talking about PURA, that's what that is, the utility regulator in the state. We have Nicole Reed-Fry, a director at Guidehouse, and Tyler Olney, a managing consultant at Guidehouse. And all of these people are really expert at what they do, and looking forward quite avidly to what they're going to present today. So I'll now pass the baton over to Bryan Garcia for some introductory remarks, and then we'll get started.
All right. Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Todd. I wanted to start off by thanking your team over at the Clean Energy Group, Sam and Seth, for not only supporting this three-part webinar series, but also being a partner with us to provide technical assistance for affordable housing. And we're going to delve into that in the third webinar in this series. I also want to recognize the leadership of the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, otherwise known as PURA, and specifically Chair Marissa Gillette, and our next speaker, Director Josh Ryor, for providing the Green Bank with an opportunity to partner with our electric distribution companies to bring energy storage solutions to families and businesses across Connecticut. Most of the audience knows who the Connecticut Green Bank is, so I'm not going to go into any detail about who we are, what we do, and how we do it. But what I do want to do is I want to tell you a story about why we do it. Our vision is a planet protected by the love of humanity. The vision was inspired by many people, including the late Maya Angelou, Mary Evelyn Tucker at the Yale Divinity School, and Mother Jennifer from the Daughters of Mary of the Immaculate Conception. I was actually on a podium with Mother Jennifer at a ribbon cutting ceremony for the daughters, and I was spouting off all of the impact metrics that the project enabled. You know, $2 million of investment, a majority of that investment coming from private capital partners. This was a 1 megawatt ground-mounted solar PV system, a system that was going to reduce a lot of greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. The webinar today is a lot about these impact metrics, our language of clean energy and climate change. But Mother Jennifer follows me on that podium and says, Bryan, that is all well and good, but in addition to all of that, as a result of this clean energy system, I'm able to expand the summer programs for the youth and the elderly and increase housing for the poor and the battered. So as we delve into today's webinar, I'd invite our audience to not only think about the details that go into a public policy like this, but also step back and put ourselves in the shoes of those families and businesses who are going to benefit from it. A planet protected by the love of humanity. I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Send in your questions. Back to you, Todd.
Excellent. Well, thank you. So I now have the privilege of introducing Josh Ryor. Josh is the Director of Utility Programs and Initiatives at the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, PURA. He oversees the state's utility-administered clean and renewable energy programs, and also PURA's key initiatives, including its framework for an equitable modern grid and performance-based regulation, among other programs. Before joining Pura, he spent the better part of a decade in various roles focused on sustainable energy technologies, utility regulation, public policy, energy economics, and corporate sustainability, most notably at the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, DEEP, and the World Resources Institute. So I will now pass the baton over to Josh to introduce today's presentation.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Todd and Bryan. We really appreciate the opportunity to present today. We think we have a great message that can be in program design and process that can be replicated in other states. So before I start, I really want to start there with that's really the key takeaway here is I'm going to walk through how Pura, as the utility regulator in Connecticut, designed a process to come up with and then ultimately authorize a program design that we'll talk more about today. And then also how we really tried to make sure that our public policy objectives were integrated directly into the final program design to make sure that we're achieving those public policy goals. And before I forget to, I should also thank both Todd and Bryan for the kind introduction and the words. We're looking forward to working with the Green Bank on delivering the promise of this program. So going to the next slide. So before I get into those promise details, I want to step back just very quickly to give you some context into Connecticut and Pura. About 2.5 years ago, we Pura, released what we called our equitable modern grid framework. There we go, which was really about delivering, or what are the objectives of an equitable modern grid and how do we get there. We can go to the next slide, please. Unfortunately, no. There we go. And so what we outlined in that document, which was really it was issued as what we call an interim decision, or another utility regulators call them rulemaking. It was really more of a white paper that set out our vision for an equitable modern grid in Connecticut, and like I said, the objectives of what that equitable modern grid is and what it would achieve. And so there's 4 objectives that we have listed here: enabling the state's economy-wide decarbonization goals, providing a more resilient, reliable, and secure commodity to customers, enhancing customer affordability and options for customers to take control of their energy affordability, and to support the growth of the green economy in Connecticut. So those were the 4 objectives. Obviously, in certain instances, those things might pull against each other, but really the objectives that we're trying to achieve here are more holistic and are weave into everything that we try to accomplish, not only in the docket in the process that I'll talk about today in this slide, but really all of the work that we try to do at Pura. Next slide. Great. So as I mentioned, the framework listed these 4 objectives. And then what I didn't mention yet was that there are actually 11 near-term topics that were outlined in the framework for an equitable modern grid, as well as all of those 11 topics flowing into an integrated distribution system plan that would make sure that we're syncing up the different topics that we investigate to achieve those 4 objectives. The first 6 topics that were initiated, again, about 2.5 years ago, were the 6 that are in front of you. And I provide that for context and to point out that the 3rd topic was electric storage. And the docket number for those that are going to go away and look to get more information on the Pura proceeding and what was in our record. The docket number is 171203, and then REO 3, and that's what we'll see on the top of the slide, what we call them REOs or reopeners. Let's see. Okay, great. So the first of 2 kind of deep dives that I want to go into on the program and the process that Pura went through, it is just that, the process. I want to talk about how we thought about designing the process to design an electric storage program and what the benefits of that were. So for those that might be familiar with this concept of an innovation funnel, it takes different forms and the steps are different depending on which model you look at. But really at its core, the thought is, or the approach is really rather to get as many ideas into the process up front, and then to filter and iterate on those ideas throughout the process so that you kind of end up with one idea or a series of ideas at the end. And then, but the process isn't done there. You continue to validate your idea that you put out there, and then grow on that idea. So really, you almost, it might actually expand on the second end, but I haven't seen a model that looks like that yet. But why I mention that is really we tried to bring this thinking when we first, to our process design, our public process design, and the different steps that we went through. So as you'll see on this slide, we have the different steps that I'll walk through that were a part of the PURA process, and how they map to the different objectives of the different timeline or parts of the innovation funnel, and the different objectives as we get closer to kind of the end results. And then just one caveat before we go to the next slide is that obviously I mentioned we want to get as many ideas as possible, really cast a wide net at the beginning, but clearly there was some scope to the ideas that we were looking for, right? So actually in that equitable modern grid framework document that I talked about earlier, we tried to identify initially the opportunity statement of the deployment of electric storage in the state of Connecticut. Great. So again, trying to map to that innovation funnel and the different steps that PURA took in its process along the way. The very first one was what was called the Solutions Day, or what we call the Solutions Day. And really, you know, we also sometimes call these technical meetings or more informal regulatory proceedings. For those that have had the pleasure of interacting with or engaging in utility regulatory proceedings across the country, you know that for non-traditional stakeholders, so folks that are not at a utility or at the Consumer Council for the state, these processes can be difficult to understand, but also difficult to navigate. So the idea, if we're really trying to focus on casting a wide net, was to try and make the first event, procedural step, really as accessible as possible. So the idea behind the Solutions Day and what it turned out to be was an invitation for all presentations. What can storage provide? What are other programs across the country that are good models to use? I believe actually that was one of the first times that we had a presentation on the Connected Solutions program that Todd mentioned earlier. And so really we tried to put out the call to everyone and anyone that had something that they could provide that fills or might address the opportunity statement that we had included in our framework for an equitable modern grid. The next thing we did was we took to going down, narrowing the ideas and topics along that innovation funnel. The next thing we did is we took everything that we learned from the Solutions Days, following up on the ideas from the Solutions Days, and we issued what we ended up calling a request for program design proposals. And I have here listed /ideation, or really what we're just looking for is tangible ideas that we could iterate on, ideas that would give us components or actual program designs that would help us iterate off of and then give us a final result, or hopefully give us a final result in program design. So the request for programs design, frankly, I think was fairly unique, at least for a utility regulatory proceeding, in that we really just issued a request from all stakeholders, say, okay, how would you design this program? What we've stated the opportunity statement, and we actually included in that request for program design proposals 3 specific objectives of what we wanted the program to accomplish. But really it was an open call, one that the Green Bank answered and provided a proposed program design, but many others provided either full program design proposals or elements of a program design that really helped us, again, start to filter out the ideas, but to put more specificity on those ideas, because that's one of the really important things about that innovation funnel, is getting more specific as you go down the filter process. So after we received those proposals from stakeholders, we took the different ideas we received, iterated internally, and then put out for stakeholder comment a straw proposal that kind of took, at least in our opinion, the best of all of the proposals we got in terms of aligning of objectives of those proposals and program design elements with what we were trying to achieve. So we issued that last January, so a little over a year now, and then had what, for those that are familiar with the utility regulatory process, a more traditional regulatory process at that point, where we had technical meetings, we had discussions and discovery or interrogatories on to stakeholders and on the different concepts that were being proposed. So really we tried to explore not only the pure straw proposal, but the stakeholder proposals as much as possible, and to vet out those ideas through a more traditional utility regulatory process. And then finally, as we iterated through that and vetted out certain elements within the program, we ended with a draft decision and then a final decision on the program design. So selecting a program and the kind of framework for that program in July. And the slides will be shared after this. So those that are interested in the nitty-gritty of what was decided and the rationale that PURA used to justify the different program design elements, those of course are included in the final decision that's hyperlinked there or in the slides you'll receive later. And then I alluded to this earlier with my comment about maybe the funnel actually gets larger after you've selected one project. It is really important, as well, we were able to build off of the success of the Connected Solutions program and designing this program and other key program elements that we saw from across the country. Really what we need to do now, and what the Green Bank and with the help of Guidehouse are going to be doing over the next year and across the program, is really validating the ideas, right, in the program design to make sure that we actually, yes, theoretically this will deliver on the promised benefits, but is it? And then really design a process. So we'll actually have PURA will have an annual review process that will allow for stakeholders to comment, and we'll receive key program metrics to make sure we're making strategic adjustments to achieve the overall objectives of the program. And we'll actually have bigger evaluations of the program every 3 years. This is very similar to at least the Connecticut Energy Efficiency Program's review process. And then again, this is an opportunity not only for validation, but program growth. One of the areas that we're really interested in digging in more as we move forward is getting more granular with the emissions data and how we can maximize the impact, the positive impact that battery storage can have on reducing emissions. So that's the process. Before I get into the program summary, I just want to reiterate that yes, while those steps that I just walked through were very specific to not only the PURA and Connecticut context, but utility regulation, those steps in general could be followed by, say, a state energy office or others that are interested in designing and iterating a program and then validating that and scaling it. So I just wanted to reiterate that if you go back to the innovations funnel, hopefully that could provide a framework for building a program like this and scaling it in the future. So quickly to go over, so what did we authorize? What does the program look like? So it's called the Energy Storage Solutions Program, which is a 9-year program to deploy 580 megawatts of electric storage in Connecticut. And for context, our peak load is about 6 to 7 gigawatts or 6 to 7,000 megawatts annually. And the program actually began back in January, and as President Garcia mentioned earlier, is being administered by both the Green Bank and our electric utilities. So I'm going to give you some of the program details by way of how they map to our program objectives. So I sprinkled in there previously the importance of objectives overall, and also having program objectives, but let me just give a high-level summary quickly. So the Equitable Modern Grid had 4 objectives. Early on with the request for program design, we actually identified 3 specific objectives for our electric storage program and program designs. And then through the kind of discovery and traditional utility regulation process, we vetted out with stakeholders the program objectives and ended up with actually 7 stakeholder objectives that aren't all listed here, but I have listed 4 in different buckets. So again, for those that are familiar with utility regulation, you will not be surprised to hear that cost effectiveness was of course at the top of our list. But also, if you remember back to the equitable modern grid goals of developing the green economy, we have the second objective here is the sustained development of the storage industry. But also when we talk about affordability, we can't forget about equity and inclusion, and you'll see that really comes through in the third objective. And then of course, resilience was listed as one of the equitable modern grid objectives and is an explicit objective here, as the program ended up being, as it was alluded to on the previous slide, is a really customer-focused program for residential and commercial and industrial customers. Great, so I'm gonna break this into 2. So the first 2 objectives, how did we go about achieving that or hoping to achieve that? Guidehouse will get into this in a lot more detail later, so I won't belabor the points. But we really dug into traditional cost effectiveness model, or rather Guidehouse did, and to the benefit of all of us. It really dug into traditional cost effectiveness testing and looking at specifically here a little bit uniquely the RIM as well as the other tests. And I think what is most notable is really the RIM, which is the impact on non-participant ratepayers, is above 1. And so that's, as a new program, that was not only notable, but really presents a huge opportunity to be, for this program, at least in my mind, to be replicated elsewhere under similar scenarios, because it's actually benefiting other ratepayers. And of course, in our minds, the total resource cost test is incredibly important and is one that, frankly, traditionally we would have looked more closely at. And then in terms of the actual incentive design, there's different ways to do this in different programs out there, but we chose a hybrid between an upfront incentive and a performance-based incentive. And I have listed there that the range for the upfront incentive is about 100 to 200, or 100 to 200 with additional adders that I'll talk about in a second, per kilowatt hour for the installed capacity. And then the performance incentives are actually, there's both a summer and winter performance incentive, and that is all factored into. With all of that, the cost benefit was what you saw previously. So to us, that was a pretty compelling story, at least on the cost effectiveness, but also in terms of ensuring the sustained development of the storage industry. Because if I go back one slide again, you'll see the participant cost test is about 1. But hopefully, I mean, essentially what that indicates to me, and we'll see what the Guidehouse folks have to say about it, but really indicates to us that it will work for those customers, provides them value, and then obviously it provides other ratepayers in society as a whole value as well. And then to finish on the last 2 slides to unpack those other 2 objectives that I listed earlier in terms of providing solutions to vulnerable communities and increased resilience. As I think we all know, behind the meter storage paired with solar has the ability to provide backup power in outages. So that became a real push for us. And then, it's not that much of it's not really a novel concept to provide higher upfront incentives for specific classes of customers, but I do want to just highlight that for underserved customers in underserved communities, which it has a specific Connecticut definition, and low-income customers, we provided a higher upfront incentive. And then what was really important too to us is making sure, and the Connecticut Green Bank is a trusted partner in Connecticut and in these communities, making sure we're not just providing a financial incentive, but going out in these communities and communicating clearly what the value proposition is to them. So that's a key focus of the program design. And then the last one, which is pretty unique, was that we had a long debate or discussion in our docket about whether or not it made more sense to provide developers with the forward capacity market capacity rights, and have them monetize it and provide those benefits to their customers, or if it made more sense for us to just retain those and thus lower essentially what the region, ISO New England, procures in terms of power. And it ended up looking like it actually provides more benefits to ratepayers if we retain those capacity rights. But what we decided to do was kind of a unique incentive adder, was to actually give those capacity rights to certain types of customers. And specifically, you'll see here, those on what we call the grid edge, or the lowest 10% performing circuits during major storms, critical facilities, backup generation for C&I customers, and small businesses, to really add an extra incentive to help customers, not only in vulnerable communities, but with resilience in vulnerable communities. And with that, again, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity today, and really look forward to the discussion at the end of the presentations.
Okay, thanks very much, Josh. Before we go to our next presenters, I just want to ask you, given all of the process that you went through and you know, all the care that you put into it, do you have any lessons learned or sort of you know, takeaways that you would offer? What's one? Let's just say one takeaway or lesson learned you would offer to another state agency or regulator that was going through a similar process to develop one of these programs?
Sure, that's a great question. It's kind of two real quickly. The solution stay is vital. You have to have if you don't have, you're really limited by how wide of a net you cast in the beginning. So having, making a big deal about that solution stay is going to be crucial to your success. And then providing, I think one thing we could have done a little bit better is providing resources to stakeholders that are responding to the RFPs. It's a very non-traditional step, as I mentioned. So making it clear, no, we really, in all seriousness, give us, how would you design the program? I think some of our stakeholders thought it was a trick or didn't really understand what that process was. So providing more resources in that step would have helped.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm going to pass this back to Bryan Garcia from the Connecticut Green Bank. I just want to mention here, we have already gotten a number of questions from our audience. Obviously, a lot of people have been on these webinars before and know that you can type questions in at any time as they occur to you into the question panel, and they will pop up here, and the faster you get them in, the more opportunity I have to kind of sort through them and pull out the ones that we can address, and we'll get to as many as we can again at the end of this next presentation. So with that, Bryan, over to you.
Excellent. So keep those questions coming. That's great. Now I'm excited to introduce and transition here from the pure presentation by Josh, which was really good on the policy process, to the Guidehouse team. I wanted to introduce two people. Nicole Reed-Fry is the director in Guidehouse's Energy, Sustainability, and Infrastructure business. In her role as project manager for Guidehouse's engagements with the Green Bank, Nicole oversaw the customer research, program benchmarking, and benefit cost analysis that informed the Green Bank's battery storage program design that was input for Connecticut's Energy Storage Solutions program. Prior to joining Guidehouse, Nicole served in the U.S. Department of Energy, Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, and the White House Council on Environmental Quality. And her colleague, Tyler Olney, is a managing consultant in the Northeast market team within the same business unit, the Energy, Sustainability, and Infrastructure team at Guidehouse. Tyler developed the benefit cost model and leads Guidehouse's benefit cost analysis for the Connecticut Energy Storage Solutions program. And with the materials, you all will have access to that spreadsheet and that model. So let me turn it over to you, Nicole.
All right. Thank you, Bryan, for that kind introduction. So quickly, before I dive into the slides here, who is Guidehouse? If you don't know, Guidehouse's Energy, Sustainability, and Infrastructure team is a team of more than 700 professionals globally who support utilities, energy providers, investors in large corporations, NGOs, and the public sector to create sustainable, resilient communities and infrastructure. All right, so here this afternoon, I'm going to be speaking about I'm just fixing this here, designing an equitable, cost-effective energy storage program and Guidehouse's role in the development of that program, which we were very honored and excited to support. There we go. So first, Guidehouse had the opportunity to support a collaborative process to design energy storage solutions. This process, as was described previously, took several years, and from Guidehouse's perspective, involved 4 main components. The first was benchmarking of existing energy storage programs, primarily in the Northeast, such as the Connected Solutions Program, a program out of PSEG Long Island, and Green Mountain Power. Second, Guidehouse also designed and conducted an online survey with residential customers to assess their interest and willingness to pay for residential energy storage, as well as gather feedback on various incentive design components, such as the upfront incentive and the ongoing performance incentive. Thirdly, and this was a major piece of our contribution, was the benefit cost analysis. So Guidehouse developed a benefit cost model that enabled us to quantify benefits and costs by customer segment to identify acceptable incentive levels that allowed the program to achieve desired cost effectiveness targets for the first 3 years of the program cycle and beyond. And then finally, Guidehouse participated in ongoing working group meetings with the Green Bank and later the utilities to drive adoption and refinement through learnings from existing programs such as the Residential Solar Incentive Program in Connecticut and Connecticut Solutions. All these activities and learnings contributed to the program design and the further iterations and refinements that were submitted through the PURA docket. The final program design includes 3 main components that are designed to maximize equitable participation and overall ratepayer benefits. So the first element is a bring your own battery design program where customers either own or finance the battery themselves, maybe as opposed to the utility owning the batteries, where those participants have the ability to use those batteries for backup power. They would have a certain guaranteed % of the battery reserved at all times, and then more of an opportunity to use that backup power if there is known severe weather or bad weather coming their way. Through this program, they're also allowed to either pair and charge those batteries with solar PV, or can have a standalone battery powered by grid power. The next program element is the upfront incentive. So this is an upfront incentive that lowers the first cost of the battery storage system in exchange for the customers allowing the batteries to dispatch daily at certain times throughout the year. And so this is more of what we call a set and forget design, where it's pre-programmed. There's nothing that the participant needs to do after that pre-programming. It's just set to dispatch discharge at certain hours of the day. And in exchange for that setting, they receive the upfront incentive. And I think, as Josh mentioned previously, this was a declining capacity block structure. So the incentive goes down over time as participation increases. And there are features such as incentive adders for low-income customers, underserved communities, and grid edge customers. The third element is the performance incentive. Sorry about that. Back up here. Where participants are enrolled in the active dispatch portion of the program, where the utilities, Eversource, and UI are actively dispatching those batteries to coincide with system peaks. And then participants are incentivized to and rewarded for their participation in those events in alignment with the maximized peak reduction benefits. All right, moving on. The dual incentive program design allows for the attainment of multiple objectives. So the battery is set to dispatch, as I mentioned, every summer weekday for a relatively long duration. And this is designed to ensure peak coincidence apart from those days with projected system peaks. And so this graphic to the right here shows kind of on both a normal day, the dispatch of the battery, and then the peak day, which is kind of in the dashed lines, how the battery is, say, charging between 12 a.m. and 6 a.m., and then holding until the battery is maybe timed to for the set it and forget it, which is that even dispatch from, say, 3 to 8 or 5 to 8 p.m. But then for the peak savings, there are additional peak savings from those day ahead events, which is the performance-based incentive. So when system peaks are forecasted, the utility will call an event in advance, which overrides that passive dispatch and will wait to dispatch at maximum power for a shorter peakier period of time that is coincident with those projected system peaks. So this acts almost like a demand response measure, and so this really aligns well with the performance incentive model. And so those are the two elements of the program design that are that work together to overall increase the program benefits. All right, so this graphic here shows kind of how we use benefit cost framework to start to think about allowable incentives for the program. So you might think about, as in the replicability of the program, how this would work. So on the left here, we have the program perspective. So you would stack up all of your program benefits against the projected fixed costs of the program, which creates what we say is an implied max available incentive. And so then looking, turning the perspective to the participant, what are the expected participant benefits? What is their expected upfront and ongoing cost of the battery? And then how does that stack up with the implied maximum incentive available? And does that create a viable value proposition to the end user customer? And then to the right, when we think about an allocation of incentives, maybe you're not at first allocating all of that maximum available incentive. Maybe you have a smaller amount planned and you can allocate that between residential, your small C&I, your large C&I class. And then with a little extra wiggle room, you could think about how you have extra kind of money to play with in terms of incentive adders to achieve some of your additional policy goals. And so now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Tyler Olney, who's going to speak in a little more detail about the benefit cost model. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And so on that last slide, Nicole kind of talked about, these different perspectives that you could think about from, the cost of the program versus the cost to a participant. That's what benefit cost analysis really is. We think of it as a systematic approach to assessing cost effectiveness across a few different key perspectives. And so you'll see the picture on the screen here is showing for each state in the US, they use one of these 5 tests as maybe a primary cost test. And each of these different tests just answers from a different perspective, is this a cost-effective program? Are we better off for doing it? And so Connecticut has actually traditionally looked at the utility cost test or the program administrator cost test. But as Director Ryor had talked about earlier, for this program, we were actually focused on the rate impact measure, which is saying, is this program likely to reduce costs to electric ratepayers? And as that last slide kind of showed, you would answer that question by comparing benefits from a certain perspective to the costs. And that's what we see on this slide. For different benefit cost categories, some may be benefits for certain tests. They may not be included for certain tests. And in some cases, you could have a cost in one test that's actually a benefit in another test. And so just to maybe give an example, societal impacts are an obvious benefit to society. Maybe it's something like environmental savings, but maybe that's not something that's directly impacting as a benefit, your electricity rate from the ratepayer impact measure test. And so basically in all of these cases, but specifically for the RIM, the real benefit that we could be driving is utility system impacts. And so for energy storage, there are a few different ways that you can use energy storage to drive utility system benefits. It could be by reducing peaks on the system, peak demand. That could be used to avoid transmission and distribution capacity that maybe would otherwise need to be built out. But there could be other pathways. There could be energy arbitrage, where you're buying energy when it's really cheap and selling it when it's really expensive. And that may make some money in the long term. And so obviously you would want to maximize whatever you can with this energy storage, whatever type of benefit, in order to then allow for the highest amount of cost, which down here is actually a program incentive and is a benefit to the participant. So again, sort of going back to the last slide, trying to maximize utility system benefits so that you can maximize the participants' benefits. And so this next slide, there's a lot of good data here, but for Connecticut specifically, what this is showing is we had looked through, there's a study for New England, this avoided energy supply costs study, which looks at the costs of all these different utility system savings that you might receive. And what we found is that there really isn't that much variability in energy prices. There's not a lot of value from ancillary services. The most value that you could get is from reducing peaks. And it turns out that you could actually, in Connecticut, every kilowatt of summer peak capacity reduction is worth about $300. And so that is a sizable benefit that you could then pass on in the form of incentives to customers. And so we went through the process of estimating for some amount of participation, what's the savings that you might expect. We multiply that by those avoided cost numbers that I was just sort of showing, and compare then the amount of benefits, which you can kind of see it in green on these charts for the RIM or maybe some of these other cost tests. Compare those benefits to some of the costs. So maybe the cost of incentives or the cost of administering the program. And there was a lot of iteration that went on throughout this step to sort of make sure the incentives were aligned so that we had a benefit cost ratio of 1 for the participant. So benefits are equal or exceeding costs, while you're still driving a lot of benefit to ratepayers, to society, and to the program administrators as well. And so maybe just taking a step back, thinking about generalizing this, sort of the approach that we took was first to think about which benefit categories sort of provide the most bang for your buck. So if you have capacity constraints in your area, peak shaving is, as we talked about here, the ideal solution or the ideal use case. But maybe if you're in an area with really high price variability, maybe there's a lot of renewables that maybe are really intermittent and come and go different times of the day. Energy arbitrage could be a really good use case for energy storage. And once you've determined that, then using some state-specific BCA framework, you can sort of back into how much funding this program could receive, and then whether that level of incentives is actually sufficient to drive adoption. And hopefully, as in this case in Connecticut, there's enough wiggle room so that you can maybe iterate to try to fine-tune the design to meet maybe additional policy goals, sort of the Justice 40 goals we had talked about. So that's it for our presentation. So see if Bryan's on, and turn it over to him.
Excellent. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Nicole, for that presentation. I'll just note that, again, we're going to make the spreadsheet available to folks who are on the webinar. So stay tuned for those of you who like to dig into the numbers. But just stepping back a little bit, Tyler, I have a question. Like, we talked a lot about BCAs and acronyms and benefit costs. What resources are available for someone who wants to learn more about benefit cost analyses?
So I would definitely recommend, I forget the slide number, but one of the slides, the first slide I think that I presented actually, talks about the National Standard Practice Manual for Benefit Cost Analysis of Distributed Energy Resources. That's a really good resource. It's a little, I think it's 100 pages or more, talking through not only BCAs sort of in general, but for every specific state in the U.S., what are their processes? Yeah, and that's where this graphic comes from. And so it's not just U.S. specific. Other benefit cost analysis is done outside of the U.S. as well. But that has a lot of really good info about both in general and also really specific to certain states. What benefits are counted, what costs are counted in a typical BCA.
Great. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Todd for the Q&A.
Okay. Well, let's see how many of these questions we can get through. First of all, we have a number of people asking whether the megawatts in different categories have been allocated yet for 2022, or in other words, where are we at in terms of enrollment, and is there still opportunity to enroll in the program, and if so, how?
Yes, great question. The short answer is yes, there's still an opportunity. Megawatts are allocated on a rolling basis. So at the end of my slide, there was a link to the Green Bank website. So that's kind of where you want to start. I'd defer to President Garcia on what the status of the residential 50 megawatts for that first program cycle, the first 3 years is. But I know that in terms of commercial and industrial programs, we've already had over 35 megawatts of projects apply, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I guess what I'll say is I'll just leave a teaser. Stay tuned for webinar 2.
Okay, but we do have room for more C&I customers to enroll.
Correct. Yep. There's still room. We're actually taking up the specific question in a PIRA docket, but yes, the short answer is yes, and definitely with the residential program, there's more capacity.
Okay. Next question regarding resiliency from these behind the meter battery systems. Are we looking at full or critical load projects? In other words, does it support the full load of the customer or just a critical load? And then how is that determined? How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll take a crack at that and see if Nicole and Tyler have anything to add. But so typically my understanding and what we saw in our docket proceeding is that typically it's not your full household that you're gonna, specifically thinking about residential customers. It's typically not going to be full home backup. Having said that, it is going to be a good amount of your critical loads. And then the other thing that's really important to think about is working with, for residential customer and even C&I customers, working with a project developer to understand the costs and benefits to you, right? Obviously the incentive is designed to help defray the cost. But it's obviously though going to cost more if you want more backup power as well. So finding that right balance as a customer, it's going to be a really important conversation between you, the developer, and the Green Bank.
Okay. I think this is a question for the Green Bank. The question, and it has to do with degradation of battery systems. So just to put this in context, like everything else, batteries work better on day 1 than they do at day 1,000, because over time they start to degrade and you lose a little bit of efficiency. So the question is, does the Green Bank realize that 80% of nameplate capacity and a 90% compliance rate will mean 100% of system capacity between the years 8 to 10? And again, I'm interpreting this to mean that taking into account system degradation by the time you get to years 8 through 10, which is at the end of the life of a typical battery, that 80% of nameplate capacity might be what you have left system or close to it.
Yeah,
That has been taken into account in any way.
I may ask our colleagues at Guidehouse to, from a modeling perspective, speak to that, and I can have my team at the next webinar speak to it. But what I would say is that one of the lessons we learned from Connected Solutions was a 5-year commitment at a certain price. This program for solutions is actually a 10-year commitment. So there's an additional years 6 through 10. The incentive level is lower than years 1 through 5, but it's sending a clear signal to the participants that there is a value beyond 5 years through years 10. So we think that there's economic value to be had there, despite the degradation of the battery system. But let me see if Guidehouse has any response.
I think there'll be a lot of learnings through the evaluation of the program. So we can look forward to that as well, to be able to learn how the systems are performing kind of out into years 8, 9, 10 as well.
Yeah, and one quick thing too to add on how the performance active dispatch works as well is it's based on your performance, right? So obviously the available capacity for performance over time is going to lower. But because of that design, there's no minimum requirement. There is a minimum requirement with a passive dispatch component of the program. And so thus to the question, but I just want to be very clear that, you know, there's still going to be that opportunity through 10 years to actively participate in the active dispatch portion.
Great. Somebody has asked whether there's a plan to augment storage with EV, vehicle to home or vehicle to grid technology.
Yeah, that's a great question. So so one of our objectives here was to get the best product out that we could and start it this year. And then I alluded to earlier, there's lots of other kind of topics for further investigation and areas for improvement. We didn't want that to delay us. We wanted that to be something that we're mindful of and then build on in the future. So that's one of I talked about maximizing emissions reductions as one of those areas. And the second one is how do we make sure that we actually have a separate managed charging program for electric vehicle chargers in Connecticut. How do we make sure those two things are optimized for one another, and do we make the eligibility, you know, you're eligible for both, or you get a pick? How do we do that? And that's something we're still looking at.
Okay, great. So perhaps some program expansions or tweaks coming up, maybe.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of, and I mentioned this earlier, the annual review process, that I would really encourage anyone that's interested in engaging at PURA and helping us improve the programs. It'll start at the same time every year in August, and the docket number will be the same. It'll just change the number. It'll be the year 0805.
Okay. Somebody is asking how the design process and the resulting program incorporated initiatives occurring beyond Connecticut. As an example, federal programs and rulemakings, ISO activities, and investments. I assume this would include FERC.
Yeah, that's a great question, and maybe I'll defer to my Guidehouse colleagues on kind of how, in terms, because it obviously impacted the cost benefit test, right? But in terms of how we PURA were thinking about it, in terms of 22-22 implementation, you know, that's something that we're going to have to start FERC order. I should be clear, FERC order 22-22. That's going to allow for distributed energy resources to be aggregated and participate in the wholesale energy markets. We're really mindful of that and making sure that we have the utility systems in place to be able to participate. So the DERM system, or the back-end systems that the utilities have in place, is a helpful starting point. And then we want to think about, as we move forward, we kind of made the active decision to only have the dispatch in the afternoon hours. We heard from stakeholders some concern about degradation if we're dispatching the systems multiple times a day in response to, you know, maybe there's, you know, frequency regulation or some of those ancillary service markets or services. But we've been trying to set up the systems in the program design that's flexible enough to really take advantage of those opportunities when they come along.
Okay, we're at 4 o'clock. I'm going to say that we're going to go a little long here, and I appreciate everybody's willingness to do that, to try to get to some more of these questions, because we do have a lot of really good questions. So if you're if you're listening and you asked a question that we haven't gotten to, we will do our best. We're going to go a little bit past the hour here. So here's an interesting question. How would smaller entities be able to take advantage of wholesale market monetization? And the questioner says usually there's a threshold of capacity to participate that might be hard to attain. Is this where aggregators come in, and was that baked into the program? So to wrap that all up, I guess the question is, is the program somehow aggregating individual participants into wholesale markets? And if so, do participants need to understand that, or can they go it alone, or how does that work? Or is that not an issue because the program sort of replaces that market?
Yeah, I'm curious if I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on this, but I mean, it's really going to be incumbent on the developer to aggregate the systems and then bid that into the market when aggregation is a possibility. So really it's incumbent on the developer in that regard. And then just one last point too, and I alluded to this back and forth that Guidehouse and myself had in our docket proceeding on the pros and cons of allowing developers to have the capacity benefits or rights versus us retaining those. To say the benefits or the capacity benefits accrue to all ratepayers if you kind of retire those benefits. So from a monetization perspective, you obviously lose that opportunity, but the actual benefits, the peak reduction benefits, still accrue to all ratepayers.
Yeah, and I would just say, sorry, I would just add briefly, I think that's one of the really nice things about the benefit cost analysis framework is that you're looking at avoided costs that you may not actually be receiving funds from any of the markets. You're avoiding having paid those costs. And there is a big question about then where does the funding come from that I think Josh could talk way more about. Sorry, Director Ryor. But I think the BCA sort of framework allows you to capture a lot of those avoided costs as a benefit and sort of prove cost effectiveness even outside of market setting.
Great. So here's an interesting question. It has to do with power injection onto the grid. So can you discharge more power to the grid than you have listed? And I guess there are kind of some related questions, which is are you just, as a customer who is enrolled in this program, are you just engaged in load reduction behind the meter? Can you inject power if you've reduced your load down to zero or your critical load or whatever portion of the load you're reducing? And then how is that treated in the program?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first answer is ask that question again in the second webinar, because that group will be key on that. The second answer really it's more of kind of an interconnection question in my mind than it is from our perspective. Our program's agnostic on that. Right, if you are exporting more than you're consuming, there's no restriction on that from the program perspective. The question is going to be in the interconnection standards and how, or process I should say, how the utilities look at a storage facility and solar plus storage facilities and how they plan for that, and really saying what upgrades are necessary. So there were previously restrictions on what could be exported beyond your load.
Okay, so yes, you can export, or no, or it depends. I'm sorry.
So I'd ask the next group. It's something that we have to look. I mean, frankly, we have to look more closely at the interconnect. My understanding is that those processes are changing because of the program and are being looked at. So I don't have a specific answer on how it's changed today, but the next webinar should for sure.
Okay, great. somebody wants to know, how does this program work for apartments? And I'm assuming that maybe by apartments, what they mean is either people who are renters, or perhaps are living in a situation where there's a master meter for multiple units. Apartments can be metered various ways. Is that something that's been considered in the program?
Yeah. So that's that's the third webinar series, right? The questions are just setting us up now, right? So yes, we've thought a lot about that. We're currently, and I hate that all of the answers to the more recent questions are having to be, we're still looking at that. But so we're trying to merge up. There's a specific multi-unit dwelling in affordable housing definition that was changed in Connecticut and applies to the residential renewable energy programs that we have. And so we're currently undergoing a process to look at that definition and change it. And then we're going to go through the process of syncing that up with multi-unit dwellings. And I'll just say this as a teaser. I think in Connecticut, our residential solar programs have both a buy-all or a feed-in tariff structure and a netting tariff structure. And the buy-all structure is actually offering the kind of new and unique ways of addressing that renter problem that we didn't currently have, we didn't previously have at our disposal.
Yeah, I would just mention that Clean Energy Group and the Connecticut Green Bank are going to be working together on providing some technical support for multifamily affordable housing facilities to enroll, and we will again address that in a future webinar. On the stakeholder engagement, was there engagement from environmental justice groups? And if so, how many compared with non-EJ groups? I don't know if you guys actually have a count, but can somebody speak to that as part of the process?
Yeah, so we've tried to actively reach out to a lot of organizations within Connecticut that have Connecticut specific knowledge. So we've gone through over the last 3 years kind of a process of making sure that we're connected with those organizations and that they're aware of what we're working on, and providing all sorts of 101 presentations. So that's to say that really, to the heart of that question is making sure that those organizations and communities are aware of what PEER is doing and how to engage. So that's really been a focus. We actually set up a whole new office that it can actively engage with stakeholders, whereas I'm on kind of what's called decisional staff side, where we're involved in the adjudicated proceedings and are unable to kind of really engage as much with those stakeholders. To the specific question on what was the participation like, the answer really is it was kind of our normal players in terms of environmental advocates and nonprofits and low-income advocates that were involved. And so, yeah, we had some participation from those groups. I think it could always be better. I think that the difficulty is that it's usually in a lot of these organizations, and I apologize for speaking for some of them, but they have one or two people that are stretched across a number of energy topics. So what we're really looking at and mindful of is thinking about ways that we can provide benefits or ease of access in terms of whether it's compensation for intervener status or helping participants get into the dockets and have the experts they need to advocate for their positions.
Okay, well, I think we're going to have to leave it there. We're at 9 minutes after, and we do want to mention that there are some upcoming webinars related to this one and other related programs that you might want to be aware of. So I will thank everyone for your participation and pass the mic back over to Samantha for upcoming events.
Thanks, Todd. So everyone should be able to see my screen now. We have two more webinars in this series coming up, which you can see on the screen. One of those is on March 15th, and the second is on March 29th. And in between those webinars, we also have a couple of other webinars that we are hosting that you may be interested in. So you can see all those details on your screen now, and we'll also send you a follow-up email with links to those webinars and how to sign up. And if you didn't catch it at the beginning, we did say that we're going to be recording this webinar. We did record it. We'll send you a copy of the recording and a PDF of the slides. We do hope to see you at the next 2 webinars in this series. Those are gearing up to be very exciting as well. Registration link coming to you via email and also available on our website, cleanegroup.org/webinars. So with that, I will thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it, especially those of you that got here early and stayed late. Bonus points for that. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you at the next one.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.